This episode features spoilers for Game of Thrones Series 8 Episode 2 and wild speculation about Episode 3, based on nothing other than my own crazed imagination. You have been warned. Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Rob Edwards, and today I'm talking Game of Thrones Series 8 Episode 2. Kind of. Look, I really want to review every episode of Game of Thrones this season, partly because it's not a huge involvement, only 6 episodes. I'm sure I can manage that. But mostly because I'm really excited about the way that we are building towards an end for this series. It's been a wild ride these last 8 years, and I'm really looking forward to where we're getting to. And I love this episode. I love this episode of Game of Thrones. I said last week that I thought we'd start having the murder and mayhem in episode 2, but I'm actually really glad we didn't. I loved the atmosphere, the character work, almost everything about episode 2 was right on the money for me. Tyrion finally gets to be Tyrion again for the first time in feels like years. We get some wonderful moments, more reunions, this time with the crows coming to Winterfell so that Jon can see them again. We get the whole kind of Jon telling Dany what he's just learned about his heritage. We get some great moments with the Hound and Arya, and a really weird moment with Arya and Gendry. I mean, not weird, perfectly sensible, perfect in character, perfectly acceptable, perfectly kind of... I've seen a few people not like the fact that Arya decided that she wanted to sleep with Gendry the night before the big battle. I think it's perfectly in character. I'm less keen that we saw it. We've grown up with Arya. In my head, Arya is still a very little girl. So the fact that we're getting this, let's put it behind us, forget about it, and move on. Because all of the rest of that episode was absolute gold. In particular, that scene in the room with the fireplace, with so many huge favourite characters all gathered together, just getting to talk and interact and let their characters shine out. And I thought it was magnificent. And the crowning part of it, of course, was Jaime knighting. So I've just realised I should have done spoilers for all this. Maybe I'll go and re-record a spoilers thing for the start. But yes, so Jaime knighting Brienne just really tugged at the heartstrings. There was a certain amount of welling of the eyes at that point. But what I want to talk about today is what I think this episode tells us about what happens in the Battle of Winterfell next episode. Because I think it has set up a pretty significant change in the dynamics of Game of Thrones. And actually, I think, despite everything now being so focused on fighting the White Walkers, fighting the dead, winning the battle because the Game of Thrones does not matter, I think we have set up Dany to completely get her head back in the Game of Thrones once more. I honestly believe that what is going to happen next episode is this. There's going to be a huge battle. We know that. We're going to have different factions of different armies kind of arrayed in defence of Winterfell. I can't remember which army is on which flank and which is in the centre and all that. But we know that Jaime and Brienne are going to be fighting on one area of the battle, and presumably the Unsullied somewhere else, presumably the Northmen and maybe the Wildlings somewhere else. So kind of broadly speaking, three different defensive lines that are going to face against the dead who are going to come swarming in. that's kind of the big battle part of it. We've got two other elements of this fight which are going to be going on. There is the plan to lure in the Night King to the Godswood. Now, I'm not 100% on the geography of the Godswood here, but it still looks like that's a walled area. So I think there's going to be a certain amount of assaulting those walls with the dead to try and get over and in with the Night King, possibly on a dragon, if the Night King's there at all. There is a case to be made to suggest the Night King's already heading to King's Landing. But so I think that there's one major element of fight there. I think there's also potentially an element of fight in the crypt. The fact that we spent so much of this episode talking about sending people to the crypt where they will be safe seems a strange choice, given that we have an enemy who can raise the dead. Now, I think there've got to be limits on this ability. I don't think that the Night King can raise dead who have been long in their graves, because that would just be OP, frankly, overpowered. It's possible that we might... it would be quite a lot of... I'm not sure fun's quite the right word, but it would be really interesting if the Night King turns up at the Battle of Winterfell and almost the first thing he does is raise Stannis' army, who died outside the walls of Winterfell not so many years ago. Actually, that would be really interesting, because then you could have Stannis, the White, facing off against Brienne, and I think that would be... that would be weird. But that's beside the point. However, if there is any way that he can raise anything in the crypt, even if it's just the 2 or 3 most recently buried there, then we suddenly have a fight where the most vulnerable of Winterfell have a couple of whites within their numbers, and that is rapidly going to become far more than a couple of whites. It's going to become exponential growth of them. I think it's where Davos is going to die. Actually, I think we saw Davos send the little girl to defend the crypt, and I think he's going to realise what's going on, and he's going to come and try and save that girl, and maybe he will, but I think he's going to fall as part of that. He's going to be one of the earliest named deaths that we get next episode. But the big thing I think we're going to get is we're going to get these 3 defensive lines of Winterfell fighting against the main force of the dead. And there's going to be a reserve force, because that's a fairly standard operating procedure in any kind of battle. There is a reserve force, which I think is primarily going to be made up of Dothraki. And I think it's going to be made of Dothraki because they are cavalrymen by the most part, which lets them do sort of sweeping attacks, stabbing at flanks, really kind of disrupting infantry, which is essentially what the dead are. And I think there's going to be this huge battle, fight, battle. And I think at some point in the battle, Brienne's flank, whichever side she is on, is going to be in desperate need of reinforcement. And they're going to sound the horn, or whatever it is, the signal they have, for summoning the Dothraki sweeping attack to reinforce them, and the Dothraki will not come. And the reason that the Dothraki will not come is Daenerys has already headed south with them. I think she is going to give up on Jon's battle, as she talked about with Sansa, because she knows there's nothing that she and her Dothraki can do to affect the battle in the Godswood. That is very much a contained battle. The Dothraki can't get in there because of the walls that the dead are swarming over. So she doesn't feel she needs to be part of that fight, and she knows that according to the strategy laid out this week, that is where the major fight's going to happen. That's where the win or loss happens, and the Dothraki cannot contribute to it. What she also knows from Theon arriving this week is that the Golden Company have arrived to support Cersei. And there is a real threat now that Dany was expecting to be able to deal with the dead and then sweep south victorious with all the Northmen beside her, the surviving Northmen. But now she's not sure that Sansa will support her. Now she's realised that there's far more enemy waiting for her at King's Landing. So she needs her best and freshest troops available to her. Now she can't necessarily bring the Unsullied because they are going to be holding one of the flanks of the main battle. But the Dothraki, who will be the reserves, I'm convinced of it, won't get engaged in the fight, won't get engaged against the dead. And so Dany has an opportunity, while everyone is distracted with the main battle, to turn south and leave. And I think this is what's going to set up the final Game of Thrones, which is happening for the end of the season, which is going to be a three-way fight. Cersei is obviously on the Iron Throne. Daenerys is going to attack her to try and take it. But now Jon knows he has no choice. Someone who is willing to sacrifice all of the North just so that she can get her goal of sitting on the Iron Throne is not someone who can be allowed to sit on the Iron Throne. And I think Jon is going to have to take the survivors of the battle against the dead, turn south and follow Daenerys, and we're going to have a big three-way battle for the end of the season. And I'm actually starting to come round to the idea, which I originally wasn't really where my head was at, that the Night King might even die in episode 3. Not to Dragonfire, by the way, because Dany's going to take the dragons as well, which Bran already knows. They said, can the Night King be burnt by Dragonfire? Bran says nobody's ever tried. Bran can sometimes see potential futures, and he has not seen anyone attempt to use dragons against the Night King, which means, I think, that he has seen that Daenerys will not be around, that dragons will not be around for the fight. So there we go. That is my take on episode 2 of Game of Thrones and my speculation for what we get in episode 3. I said Davos was the first named character to die. I think we've got a big list of people who we are going to lose in episode 3. I think Beric is going to die, Beric Dondarrion, but I think Beric Dondarrion, this is not my theory, this is something I saw on What Culture, I think Beric is going to die, giving up his last life to resurrect the Hound, who has died, and he will actually bestow essentially his Lord of Light powers upon the Hound, and the Hound is going to go into battle eventually against the Mountain wielding a flaming sword, which will just be weird, but also I'm all in for it. So the Hound will appear to die, but Beric will bring him back, and Beric will die as a result. Grey Worm's dead. I think there's a good chance we lose Brienne. Jorah I can go either way on. If he is with the main fight and trying to protect Lyanna Mormont, then I think he's dead. If he is riding his horse next to Dany when Dany turns south, I think he will live. So it really depends on where he gets positioned in the battle, whether he lives or dies. I think it will look like Arya will die, but I think there will be a reveal at the end, which she didn't. Not the end of this episode, I think at the end of the season. So I think we'll see Arya die next episode and her reappear with a mask in the end episode. I think Theon's gone. Actually, if you watch my episode, my review last week, I said that Theon I thought might be one of the survivors of the entire series. That's completely blown out the water by episode 2. He's so dead. So I've already lost, as far as I'm concerned, against my wife on that particular point. But I'm sticking with my guns. Theon lives. That's what I'm saying is my death pool. But I really think he's going to die now. So it's going to be a bloodbath. We're going to lose so many people. I genuinely think Sansa and Jon are safe-ish, because I think there is still a fight to be had there. The only way that Sansa dies next episode is if Daenerys turns against her specifically during the battle. Maybe Sansa and Daenerys are sitting on horses watching the battle, and when Daenerys makes the decision to go, that's when Sansa is killed. I mean, it would be the final thing to set Jon off, but I think there's enough momentum to set Jon off against Daenerys just by her deserting the battle. And Anyway, there we go. That's my thought for what's happening for next episode. Let's find out next week if I was right. Hope you enjoyed that, and I will catch you next week for more Game of Thrones. Cheers.